Continuing our series on the Latvian Gambit, this will be Latvian Gambit 11. This is probably the most aggressive version of the Latvian Gambit you're going to find from white. It also allows us to very quickly employ all the principles that we're used to, such as developing and using the F file, and that actually decides this game. We're also going to have a good presence in the center, and even though the computer recommends that we castle queenside, it never got quite that far in this game. So, without further ado, here's the game. We'll start our engine. See, we have some freezing going on. Okay. So, what we've got here is the recommendation, knight takes e5, and what the computer actually considers to be an error. Bishop to c4, the so-called Mayet attack. I don't know what this was called, but the recommendation here from the computer is to play knight to c6. And I've never played knight to c6, so I'd like to try that someday, but I do play that move, which according to the computer is inferior. And it simply allows him to get in on f7, which is fine with me. Now the computer's actually changed its mind, so we're going to go queen to g5, which is the standard move, knight to f7. Now we're forked. We have a version of the family fork going on. However, we're after his rook pawn. So these are all standard moves, and rook to f1 is forced. And I played this variation against Fritz, master level, a number of times. Fritz ends up forcing a repetition of moves, where my king ends up over on d8, and he's checking me, and I'm moving back and forth. So it is kind of interesting that Fritz does that, and here the computer's recommending both knight to f6 and d5, and in the past I preferred a knight to, or rather, pawn to d5, and I actually thought I almost invented that move, but I'm sure I didn't. I mean, this has been around many, many years. So, okay, so he's going to take, and the major mistake here would be to take the bishop. When you take the bishop, bad things happen. So, I mean, you can obviously see, there's queen checks, there's all kinds of things that are available to white, so you want to stop that queen check for the first thing. And now the computer says he ought to check and occupy the c6 square, then retreat to e2, but we don't do that, so he just simply goes back to e2, which is a safe spot to go to. Now, the key to this variation at this point, the computer wants me to play queen takes h2, in my opinion, is trying to get your knight to c6 and either e5 or d4, because you're going to create a lot of pressure and create this boxed-in effect of his king and these mating threats. And even though we're down in material here quite significantly, black has at least an even game, and right now it's saying an actual advantage. So he actually wants me to take the rook pawn and move the bishop to h3, something like that. I move the knight. Now, why the computer didn't say this was good, I don't know. Maybe d4. d4 is a good move here. And then again, it wants me to play queen takes h2. Now, this person took a long time on this move, as I recall, because he didn't know the opening theory. So this is a very complex and difficult opening theory to figure out. There's one or two lines that somebody should know. And as you see, what happened was he made one move too many with a bishop, and he's down 6.9 in one move. So he went from basically an even game to lost. And of course, but that of course remains to see how we win this, and that's how we win this actually. And as I mentioned before, his appropriate response ought to be to have a bishop on e2, but if he doesn't have a bishop on e2, he's going to get knight to d4 followed by a lot of horrible things. The rook is going to end up loose. So it says now he should give up the queen. Thank you, computer. And so f3 is played, and now once bishop takes f3, but I just play pawn takes, and I'm not making all the best moves here, but every move wins. So as you can see, he wants d4, he interposes his rook, which just ends up with a check. And of course, if he moves his rook back, then he gets a check with the pawn, among other things. So now it wants me to castle queenside, which I also didn't do, so I guess that would be considered a blunder, since technically I'm up about 25 here, and after that move I'm only up about 10, although it'll probably come back some. There we go, we're up 15, but according to a computer, see, it's still a blunder. So now he plays d4. It's a little late, and now the computer still wants me to castle queenside, and yet what I do is I just take the pawn. And now that allows him to take the f pawn and resign simultaneously. So this was a disaster for a person who simply didn't know the theory, and it could have happened to anybody. And it's an example of how dangerous that is. Even I get confused, in some of the lines after playing it many times against people. So that's an example of the Mayat variation of the Latvian.